Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome back to this interview series here on the channel now in the month of October 2020. I am delighted this afternoon to be joined by Rebecca Gould, who is a student and foundation liaison manager at the Medical Defence Union. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the MDU, why they exist, what they can do for us, and why you should consider getting involved and joining as a medical student and a young doctor. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem at all, Ollie. Thanks for having us on today.
I mean, thank you for being here. The MDU, this is the second take, as confess, of this introduction, so I'm trying to think how to do it more cleanly. As I was saying to Rebecca before, the MDU, when you start as a medical student, everything's all very new and exciting. You don't really know what's going on with anything. But you start just poddling around the medical school and going to conferences and things like that. Eventually, you will come across the MDU, right? And if you're anything like me, you'll be wondering, this looks very fancy and exciting and official, but I don't really understand what's going on. So would you be able to fill us in a little bit on what the MDU actually is, what the role is, and why, why did it even come to be in the first instance?
Yeah, absolutely, Ollie. It's one of the questions we get asked a lot from medical students, and is one of the reasons we come into the medical school to be able to introduce ourselves and explain the history of the MDU. So the MDU stands for the Medical Defence Union, as you've already said, and we're the world's first ever defence organisation. So we were set up back in 1885, following outrage from the medical community over the case of Dr. David Bradley. I don't know if you know much about the case of Dr. Bradley.
No.
So Dr. Bradley was a doctor who had gone to help a lady who had seizured, had loosened her clothing to help her while she was seizuring, and then when he'd left the room, she woke up and thought that she'd been assaulted.
I see.
So this led to a conviction of assault. He went to prison for 8 months, and it took a group of gentlemen who pooled their money together to pay his legal defence, who then overturned the conviction, and he got a full pardon. So that was the case of Dr. David Bradley, and this is really important for the MDU because this is principally how we still work today. It is about doctors who, pooling their money together, are able to pay out the legal defence of doctors who need it here in the UK.
Okay, I mean that raises a few questions, and I purposefully not done my background reading before this, so my questions would kind of be more organic. That sounds, I don't know whether, is it a charity? I mean, that to me sounds somewhat like a charity, but maybe not.
So we're not, yeah, so I can see why you would think that. We're not registered as a charity. We're what is referred to as a mutual non-profit organisation. So we are entirely owned by our members. If you were to join the membership, then you effectively become a shareholder. So we don't have anyone trying to make profit from the money. It's about members putting their money together so that they can support one another through legal defence. So it's a mutual non-profit organisation, and we've run that way since back from 1885.
Okay, and so you've kind of said then that the goal, as far as I understand what you've said, is this this sense that if someone needs what could potentially be a very expensive legal defense, as things in the legal system are, say I got into some legal trouble and I had no way of being able to afford a slick lawyer that I might need, or even a lawyer at all. The idea is that there is money from those who can provide money to help those who can't support it by their own means. Is that?
Yeah, as long as you're part of the membership and you were in active membership when the issue came about, then regardless of whether you're a student member or whether you're a consultant, all our members are entitled to that legal support. So we actually have over 200,000 members. We're the largest defence organisation in the UK, and that makes us incredibly strong in terms of when you think of the pot of money that we have to be able to support those doctors. It really gives us sort of that strength to be able to defend them, and the reputation of the MDU is that sort of defence that we offer.
Amazing. I mean, I'm just thinking, that case that you were talking about with the GP there, David Bradley, is that the name? The number of situations that must, just because of what people have to do in healthcare, that must come very close to towing that line where things can be misunderstood or are just kind of legally grey. I think the best place probably to start then is more generally, and this is slightly out of order with what I've planned, but maybe why should a medical student, I'm, as I said, I'm just coming into my final year. I'm perhaps unlikely to be doing anything that, because I'm always under such close supervision, that's likely going to land me in hot water. Why should I, as a medical student, think about joining up with the MDU?
So as a medical student, there is obviously the defence, and that is primarily what we do as a defence organisation, but there are numerous benefits that you can access while you're a student. So not only is there the defence and the legal support, the access to the 24-hour, 7 days a week advice line. So yeah, the students have access to our student journal. It's called Notes. We send it out roughly quarterly. That gives them student studies, it gives them careers advice, medical legal updates, changes in the guidance. So students are able to access all those changes as and when they're happening. We also give them access to discounts and savings. So if they log on to the My Membership page on the account, they can see what discounts they can get on medical textbooks. We also have access to Sign Up, which I don't know if you've come across Sign Up before.
I think I've heard of it, but I'm not quite sure what it is.
So it's basically a revision platform that was created by some medical students. I think they were from Leeds originally. They realised their time was really short. They kind of had 5 minutes here or there, as you'll probably appreciate, Ollie. So they set up a app on their phone where they could test themselves in 5 minutes. And Sign Up now, you can do 5 minutes, you can do 30 minutes, but it takes all the information from the Oxford Medical Press, turns it into questions, and then you can use that as a way to revise. Medical students have said it's been really, really helpful for them to work around clinical placements, and we give students completely free access to that they can use. We also do free electives indemnity, which probably is a bit of a touchy subject for students talking about electives.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have one, so that's but it's important, so let's cover it.
Yeah, so it also includes UK electives as well, but equally, if you're going abroad, there are some countries that will ask you to show that you have indemnity in place, and that's completely free through the MDU. And then we also have, for our doctors, we have things like free CPD courses that they can do online. We have 24-hour access to media advice, so if a journalist was to contact a doctor. So it is predominantly defence, but there are a number of other benefits that we offer as well.
Amazing. I mean, you've kind of covered there for both doctors and medical students, but focusing on the younger ones. I mean, just for the boys and girls at home, just to expand on a couple of the things that Rebecca said there. So the electives, because a lot of the people watching you will be thinking about going to medical school. Usually towards the end of medical school, before you become a doctor, you get a period of time, and that might be 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on your medical school, where they just sort of release you into the world somewhere and go and learn some medicine somewhere. And for many people, this can take them abroad. Many people choose to do them in the UK. You could go Australia, Canada, America, Africa, anywhere you might like to go. But because you are obviously a UK, not just a UK citizen, but a UK medical student operating in an environment in which no one is potentially legally responsible for you, maybe other than your home institution. But if you're somewhere else, that's not going to mean an awful lot. Particularly, it is really important that if anything goes wrong, as Rebecca said, that you are covered. And I know, not that I will have an elective, but when I was looking at where I might want to go, many places, as Rebecca very rightly points out, they insist that you have proper legal coverage, just so they're protected as much as we are.
Just to pick up on that, Ollie, because I think you raised a really important point about putting yourself into an environment that's very different to what the NHS offer, where everything is so heavily supervised. There's a very strict sort of training program for medical students, foundation doctors, and the elective is such a fantastic opportunity, but it is also a chance where you're going to be put in potentially into environments where people will ask you to work outside the limits of your competency. And it's about being able to recognise that and thinking about what you're able to do as a medical student. And that's, I think, one of the first times a student will really be challenged in that, by going to a different country and sort of experiencing a different way of working.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said there about the really important thing is that as much as you are protecting the patients and the people that you are working with, you are also protecting yourself. It's quite easy to see, because everything is so strict here, one kind of bad incident that is a bit kind of legally suspect, that can be you struck off for life, right? At least in the UK, and it's not worth a silly mistake ruining the career that you've been working for however many years to set up. You identified there, Rebecca, some of the benefits, you know, the educational sounding stuff. What about, you know, 2 or 3, 5 years down the line when we're working as doctors? Is there still a role for the MDU then?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously there's the side of the defence, which we've already talked about. When it comes to the side of the education, that's the role of the liaison managers like myself. So for me, I work with the students and foundation doctors. But going forward in your careers, we have specialist teams that work both with GPs directly in their surgery, and we have a hospital team as well that works with the hospital doctors and the consultants. So we actually go out into the education centres, we run training days with them, and this covers the issues that actually have been requested by the doctors at our hospital. And it can cover anything from consent, working with chaperones, complaints, GMC procedures, but what the cohort are looking for at that time, and we go in and run training days with them, which generally works really well because we can give them that direct feedback as to the cases that we're working with.
Sure, I can see that being immensely useful, and I didn't pick up on it before, but the media stuff particularly, I can see if particularly if you're a bit gobby and loud sometimes, like I am, like on the internet, where, well, I don't know whether you guys know, but I fairly recently had to do an interview with the Times, right? And that a lot of that was asking about the inner workings of the NHS and of what it's like to be a medical student, and all truth be told, things that are probably better asked of doctors than of medical students. And it got to the night before the interview and I was thinking, I actually have the potential to be in some real hot water here if I say something, like you say, beyond my competence that I'm not able to talk about, or I inadvertently give some advice or something that is not quite right. So actually, I can very much see the utility of a service like that, particularly how doctors are always in the media.
Yes,
One way or another.
The thing is, the doctors as a profession are so highly valued that as a society we want to know about them. So often when there is something like there is an issue with an investigation, if it is picked up by the media, generally it hits them by storm. And it's really important for doctors to know where they get that support from, that it's not, even if they speak to somebody at the hospital, it's not about the hospital's best interest, but it's actually about their own professional interests and what is right for them. And that's why, as a defence organisation, we offer sort of that support with dealing with the media. Because if a journalist was to simply approach you in the street or was to try and make contact with you, it can feel quite difficult to know what to say in those situations. So to have somebody that you can phone and say, this is what I've been asked, this is kind of what I would want to say, should I engage in this? It gives you that opportunity to have that discussion and check your own professional interests first before you enter those conversations.
Yeah, for sure. That's really, really important. And I think it's really important for even, I guess, young or even would-be doctors to not underestimate the value of that, particularly with the internet. You know, once stuff is out there, it's out there. So getting that sort of stuff checked is really important, which kind of brings me on to what I guess would be the meaty topic of this, and what I think the people will find quite interesting, as I know I will, which is, and we can approach this however you like, but what sort of legal problems, just purely statistically, do medical students and doctors tend to find themselves involved in?
This is a complex question to answer, because we cover such a variety of things. And what I would like to start with saying is, as a general rule of thumb, if it is anything medico-legal, whether it be a concern that's been raised about yourself, so an investigation, or whether you have a concern about your working environment or a colleague's behaviour or an ethical dilemma that's arisen, that's the time to call your defence organisation. So you don't have to sort of fall within certain areas to call. As a medical student, you do start clinical placements, and it is very rare for a medical student to have a complaint raised against them, albeit there is the potential for a patient to be unhappy about the care they've received. Where we do tend to find, for focusing on medical students first really, where we do tend to find that they can get tripped up is more down to poor communication or working outside the limits of their competence. So, for example, if they were to see a patient and they were to breach confidentiality, or they were to run an exam without getting fully informed consent, they can raise issues and complaints with patients. The ones that we see with medical students in terms of the medical school proceedings and fitness to practice proceedings are more around allegations of drug and alcohol misuse, probity, so effectively lying or cheating on exams, health concerns, so if somebody's health is affecting their ability to train, there may be a discussion around that, and generally unprofessional behaviour. I know you touched on it earlier, Ollie, about sort of how the reputation of doctors, and that it's not just what you do sort of in lecture theatres, but actually what happens both inside and outside of medical school. So we have had cases of people who have said things on social media, for example, and then that's been called under distribute with the medical school. So they're the ones that we see more with medical students. Has that helped answer your question? Or?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, for sure. So it's more, I mean, definitely there are a couple of things that I think medical schools, or certain, maybe not medical schools, but certainly my consultants, my own experience, they are becoming increasingly medico-legally minded. And I don't know what other people have experienced, but certainly in my own cases, often the line is, we do these elements of practice not because they have any clinical value, but because we have to protect ourselves, and that's quite a common thing you hear. And just echoing, and this is something, I'm on my general practice rotation at the moment, so communications are perhaps more informal and scattered perhaps with patients than they would be in a hospital. You have to be so clear with people when you're interacting with them, even before you start. In my case, hello, my name is Ollie, I'm a medical student. Were you told that you would be seeing medical students? Do you know what a medical student is? Do you know? And just making sure that the patient is fully on board, because it happens where you get halfway through a consult and they clearly thought you were a doctor, and you don't want to be in situations like that, because as Rebecca said, I guess even if they reveal information to you that they perhaps wouldn't have done if they didn't, if they thought that you were someone else, or they allow you to perform an intimate examination on them that they would not have normally allowed a student to do, that's your problem. If you've not communicated it properly enough, that's on you. So I just want to echo that. That's really important when you get into your clinical placements.
Just to support that, Ollie, in fact, a third of all complaints coming in from patients can be directly related to communication. So even if you were to learn no further medical knowledge outside of medical school and you were to continue as a doctor, you can still cut your chances of getting a complaint by a third just by being a really good communicator and taking the time to communicate with your patient effectively. So it's one of the key things that we highlight when we do seminars for foundation doctors is how much time are they spending communicating with their patient, because that's where we can see that the miscommunication is the thing that can cause medico-legal issues.
Yeah, I can very, very easily understand that, because we, as medical students, and I can assume this doesn't get any better for doctors, we are very bad at not taking things for granted and sort of mutual understanding. We just tend to understand by virtue of, we're wearing our scrubs, we're wearing our badges that says medical student and so on, and that the patient kind of innately understands sometimes as much as we do about what's going on. And I'd never set foot in a hospital before I went to medical school. So it was a completely alien environment to me, and I can only assume that that's going to be the same for a very large number of patients. So you really have to pull out all the stops in confirming that mutual understanding. What about doctors, Rebecca? So obviously that's more the medical student side, but because doctors are autonomous practitioners for the most part, there's obviously a lot more room for error. So what sort of problems do doctors experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it really does vary. The best place I could signpost to really to see the sort of cases that we deal with doctors is our cautionary tales that's on our website. So where we've had permission from the doctor to, obviously we anonymise them, but we strip back some of the details and then we share their story as to what the complaint has been, whether it be a GMC investigation or a disciplinary investigation, and explain what the case has been. There are similar themes running from both medical students and doctors. So things like consent, breaches of confidentiality, issues with communication and use of chaperones, that sort of thing. They are always going to be running themes. The ones that GMC tend to take quite seriously are probity issues. If they think that whether it be a medical student or a doctor has in some way falsified information, that is taken very, very seriously. And we always kind of joke with med students that, you know, you can show that your medical school or the GMC that you can learn to take consent differently. You can learn more information on that, or you could learn more about confidentiality, but you can't go on a course to not lie. That's something that is an ethical thing that we will have to understand. And that's something the GMC take very seriously. So whether that be for a med student or a doctor, if they think you falsified information, that can lead to quite serious consequences.
For sure. I mean, it's one of those things that is screened for, I feel like, extensively in medical school applications. It's one of the almost the worst things you can do. And just to, it's really interesting to, because you've just essentially confirmed, I guess, what you said earlier, where none of those things that you actually mentioned are medical problems. They're all communication or interpersonal relationship or ethical problems. None of that was actually to do with the medical decision making or giving someone the wrong tablet or, you know, doing surgery wrong or something, which I think is kind of what I was expecting.
Yeah, but it's interesting you should pick up on that, Ollie, because when I speak to foundation doctors when I'm doing teaching, it's the one thing I think that they're most worried about is that a clinical decision that they've made is going to lead to a medical error. And then that's the thing that's going to be investigated. But when you actually look at the statistics, it's more around communication than it is medical errors. And certainly with medical errors, you know, we can't all be perfect to make the right decision all the time in our jobs, whether that be for a doctor or in any profession. And you can certainly learn to do prescriptions differently. So medical errors, I think, particularly if it is an isolated case, they're given quite a lot of leniency in that sense. Well, I probably would cut that out. I'm not sure I would say leniency.
There might be can we word it differently, perhaps?
Yeah.
Just maybe like, yeah, I mean, this is news to me. Like, I didn't know this, but
things more that the GMC aren't expecting their doctors to make exactly the right decisions all the time. What they're expecting you is to be able to follow the standards that they set. And it's far more important to them that a doctor is able to reflect on if a mistake has happened, they're able to reflect on it and grow as a doctor. And the emphasis is far more on that reflective practice than actually allowing people into this unhealthy environment where they think that they shouldn't be allowed to make a mistake. Because that's an impractical world to sort of put a doctor into. So mistakes do happen, but what's important is how you reflect on them and how you learn from that opportunity. And certainly when we work with the investigations, that's very much what they focus on.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, that I give someone the wrong antibiotic or something, right? And the GMC could very correctly say, well, the NICE guidelines, which are the BNF or whatever, the guidelines that tell me what I should be prescribing, say that you should have given this, but you gave this, and that's a problem. Like, we need to work out, you know, why you made that mistake and what we're going to do about it. So I'm much better placed by saying, you know what, I made a mistake because maybe I was tired or I didn't check the BNF, or I didn't check with a colleague, rather than just saying, no, I didn't do that. The nurse gave the wrong drug or something.
Yeah, absolutely, Ollie. It's about sort of recognising if a mistake has happened, speaking to the relevant people, and this is why you have an educational supervisor going onto your foundation programme. You'll have that person that you can discuss those things with, and that is far more respected both in the profession and also by your regulatory body than to expect somebody never to admit or acknowledge a mistake. mistakes are effectively, they are learning opportunities. They're opportunities for people to grow and be better doctors. So I think it's really helpful to think of it more in those terms rather than something that we should never acknowledge happens, because that can be quite unhealthy.
Say I get an email from my hospital director or something saying, Ollie, a complaint has been made against you and this is going to lead to legal proceedings, or it could do. I guess, before I speak to anyone, before I start doing anything, what should as far as the MDU is concerned, what should my process be?
So it's quite a simple process when it comes to medico-legal, particularly if you think that it's going to lead to an investigation, which is the first port of call is simply pick up the phone. I would advise that all our members keep our phone number with them, whether that be kept actually in your phone as a stored phone number. It's written on all our pens. We often hand out a lot of pens, which the MDU is renowned for, but generally to keep the number with you. When you call our medico-legal advisors on the helpline, they would then open a case and they would work with you throughout that case. So what might happen, depending on what the case would be, is they might actually ask you to send over the correspondence you've already had. So, for example, if it had been a patient complaint, they might ask to see a copy of that. Or if the medical school had been in touch and said that they were having a hearing, they might ask to see a copy of the letter. That would then be put in your case file, and the case files are managed by our medical legal advisors. So these are qualified doctors. They've then done legal training. They are incredibly qualified people, and they are the people who sit with you and kind of go through that case with you step by step to talk you through what the process will be. And they do everything from kind of helping you write statements for the cases, and they will proofread them with you. They will attend hearings with you. And it really depends on a case by case basis. But we try and keep the process simple at the beginning, which is that you simply give them a call and then they can open a case and they will discuss the next steps with you.
Amazing. Good. That's kind of reassuring as well. That, I mean, this is speaking as someone who has, thankfully, touch wood, never been through, a formal legal proceeding or an investigation like that. But it's reassuring to know that the advisors that I would get are medically trained. I think that would be one of the real worries, I guess, that I had, because it's as you've kind of identified, it's a very particular environment with a lot of very specific considerations that perhaps don't exist elsewhere, just because of the complexity of what comes up for doctors and nurses and health staff, and as well as the idea that I would have a consistent set of eyes on my case through the process, I guess, rather than being shipped around between people that aren't interested in my case. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously it would vary case to case, but I think when you look at something like a GMC investigation, doctors report to us that it's probably the most stressful thing they go through in their whole career. So to try and go through that process and go through it trying to manage different people makes the whole process more stressful. So to have that one point of call, that one point of contact, means that person knows your case and they're able to kind of support you with it step by step and tell you what's coming up next, what sort of things you can do to help prepare for that. The consistency is really important with that and will help doctors manage their stress in the investigation.
For sure. And I mean, it's perhaps a rather dark or morbid element to all of this, but from at least my quite superficial understanding, it's when you look at the reasons that many doctors commit suicide and end up taking their own lives, maybe not quite often, but obviously often enough for me to be aware of it, it's linked to legal investigations, because I guess for people who have maybe defined their entire lives and their sense of self-worth is very tied to this medical career, and they've kind of not known much else, I guess, to be put up and very rigorously investigated and accused, it must be incredibly stressful. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I think particularly when you spend your entire life working as a career as a doctor, and you've put so much of yourself into it. Like you said, a lot of people define themselves in that way, that, you know, it is somebody as to who they are. So to then go through criticism and potentially an investigation where somebody is going to critique what you have done is a really, really stressful time for doctors, and can have a huge impact on their mental health. And it's really, really important that those doctors get the support that they need, and that they know that they're not going through it on their own. There are actually lots of places they can get support, and it's trying to sort of explain to doctors where they get that support and making sure they do reach out when they need it.
It doesn't sound like, from what you've described, almost like a lobbying group or a set of political activists. You're there as a defence union. Does the MDU have any influence or say in medical law itself?
Well, actually, this is something we don't talk about very often, but we actually have a huge impact in terms of the medico-legal world. So the short answer to that is yes, we very much are very active in influencing sort of policymakers and what happens in government. So just to give you a couple examples of that, because we don't often get to talk about this side of the work that the MDU do. So in the past few years, we've very much been lobbying in government for state-backed indemnity for GPs. I don't know if you were aware that over the past few years, the indemnity of GPs has been different to that of the indemnity of hospital doctors.
No.
So what was happening in the past was, if you worked as a hospital doctor, you would be under the NHS indemnity scheme, and they would pay out your claims for compensation, and then your defence organisation would support you with the other investigations, so like GMC investigations, disciplinary investigations, that sort of thing. For GPs, they were having no NHS indemnity at all, so they were also having to cover themselves for claims for compensation.
Wow.
So it was all falling on GP shoulders effectively. We've been lobbying for that to change for years, and as of last year, they brought out state-backed indemnity for GPs, bringing them in line with hospital doctors. This was something that's really, really important, particularly for our GP members who are having to burden that cost. And now they've been brought in line with hospital doctors. That was one of our past campaigns that we've had. The current campaign that we're running at the moment, or at least one of them, is sort of lobbying to policymakers that all healthcare professionals should be exempt from COVID-19 related claims. It's a way of recognising the immense efforts that all healthcare professionals are putting into during the pandemic, and particularly the difficult environment that healthcare professionals are put under at the moment, to recognise the effort that's going into that, and that they're working in a very complex environment. So one of the things that we're doing is lobbying that claims that are directly related to COVID-19 should be exempt.
I mean, that's really interesting. I can see many medical students like myself during what I guess we can now call the first peak of COVID-19. We were working in meantime sort of healthcare assistant roles, and I remember speaking to the healthcare teams when I was doing that particularly where I was based on a unit where cardiac arrests were not, ridiculously uncommon, and sometimes you might have to do CPR or invasive procedures, and particularly more towards the beginning, although I don't know whether this has changed, people were very, if I do CPR, am I legally backed? Do I need to not waste time, but spend time putting on the PPE? Or if I don't don my PPE and I do CPR, am I legally, it was more, are we protected if we do these potentially life-saving interventions when the guidelines aren't necessarily clear or consistent or even understood by potentially a large portion of your workforce? So things like that's really interesting and quite reassuring to hear.
Yeah, I think particularly as the guidelines themselves were changing, like you've said, it was a very fast-moving environment. You only have to look at something like death certificates and how the guidelines around that changed, and trying to disseminate that information out to our members as and when it was happening and when Parliament was making these decisions. That was something that we were quite keen to try and get across in terms of the changes to guidelines. But I think when you're actually out on the front line and these things are changing, you are dealing with different circumstances. Certainly from our perspective, we appreciate that doctors have been put into very difficult circumstances sometimes, very difficult conditions. And that's why we advocate to our policymakers that doctors shouldn't be singled out and blamed for any single incident, that you have to look at the complex system, you have to look at the environment in which that doctor was working in. And you have to look at it within its context, and that's something that we advocate for all our members, and there's a lot of information about that on our website.
Awesome, thank you. I'll all relevant links, as with social media links and the things, will all be overlaid on the video and in the description. I've only got 2 more questions for you, but you've alluded to one of them, which is, how does the MDU, because my first exposure to the MDU was when I rocked up my first year as a medical student, you know, excited and eager to start, and we were all getting our stethoscopes and white coats and stuff like that. And I remember seeing a stand, you know, in my common room, and they seemed to be giving out lots of tote bags and what I think were medical handbooks of some description, if I remember. So this question is, how does the MDU work with medical schools?
It's a really good question, and we actually do an awful lot with medical schools. As myself, I'm a dedicated liaison manager for students and foundation doctors, which means we have a whole team of us that work directly with the medical schools. For me, I work in the Midlands area, so I actually liaise directly with each individual medical school. That's really important because each one works differently. I think you might have said it a bit earlier, Ollie, that you know how Warwick works will be different to another medical school in terms of their curriculum and how they're staged. So we actually speak to the programme coordinators, we ask them what information they need from us. Some places like King's, for example, they want case studies, they want to do medico-legal talks. And then there's other medical schools that will give us 10-minute slots to talk about indemnity requirements. So it depends on the medical school in terms of the information they want from us. The other thing we do at medical school is we offer financial sponsorship. So that can be directly with the medical school, looking at things like sponsoring the results day, making sure there's refreshments available for staff and students. But it could also be working directly with the students and with their student-led events. It's something that the MDU really want to support. It's something that's a huge part of medical school, is working with the societies and helping them support the learning of other students. So you can apply to the MDU for funding with your society, and we help you run academic events that are going to benefit your cohort.
Yeah, and just to echo that, events that I've either been part of or run myself, the MDU have sponsored in the past. You know, we run, I know our surgical society has run events in the past, sort of careers events and workshops and things, which I know the MDU has supported. We set up a widening participation in medicine initiative a couple of years ago, which the MDU, it's now been a relative enough success that the medical school funds it itself now. But certainly when we needed to do our first establishing round and try for funding, because it was an expensive event, the MDU were one of the groups that stepped up and were very generous. So definitely, guys, that's if you're a medical student thinking about getting involved in these larger events and you need funding, the MDU are one of the groups that I would recommend speaking to. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would always say to any student who's looking for sponsorship, you're always better to ask, and then we can discuss it with you in terms of requirements and what would be helpful from us. It is more academic events, so we wouldn't tend to sponsor things like sports or evening events, that sort of thing, because it's designed to support students' academic learning. That's the ethos of the MDU.
Yeah.
But I would always encourage students, if they are at all involved in a society and they're thinking of running an event, you're better getting involved and asking the MDU and having a conversation with them, because chances are we probably will be able to help. And even if it's through the expertise of what we've done with societies in previous years, we can sort of share that information with you, tell you what things have worked well, and hopefully look at organising things like refreshments or helping with other ways, printing costs, that sort of stuff. And it can really help students run events.
For sure. And then the last one, before I waste any more of your valuable time, is, and I think I like to end these videos with kind of general pieces of advice and take home messages that are going to be useful for the viewers. This one is, does the MDU have any general guidelines or general pieces of advice for medical students for keeping ourselves legally safe and making sure that we don't get into problems in the first instance?
That's a good question. I would say there's lots of guidance obviously on the website, which I'm sure you'll signpost to. But what I would do is outline 4 points that I normally speak to medical students about. So familiarise yourself with the GMC guidance, particularly around professional values and fitness to practice. The GMC standards are what you are measured against if anyone was to criticise a decision you've made. So it's really important to understand what your regulatory body expects of you. The second thing is to consider your conduct both inside as well as outside medical school. So something that can trip some students up is things maybe that they've put on social media or things that have happened outside of med school, that you are representing a profession when you are training as a doctor. So considering your conduct both inside and outside medical school would be another tip. The third thing I'd say is look after your health. Particularly while you're at med school, you have a good opportunity to get yourself into a good routine with both sleep, making sure you're eating properly, and looking generally after your health so that those things are in place for when you start as a doctor. If you do feel unwell, speak to a GP. You cannot be your own doctor. You cannot have that impartiality. So do make sure you speak to a doctor if you are feeling unwell. And the fourth thing I would say is seek advice. If you're at all concerned about anything, it's really important that you get that advice either from a senior colleague, or if it's to do with a medico-legal concern or ethical query, obviously you can come to your defence organisation. But the NHS is a huge system, and the medical schools are very, very well established. So you have lots of places you can go to ask for advice. And you should never feel isolated or feel you have to make a decision on your own. There are going to be lots of people around you with expertise. So it's just really important to feel confident, speak up, and get that advice when you need it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Rebecca Gould from the Medical Defence Union. If you've got questions, guys, I think the best place if you have questions is probably to contact the MDU directly. All of the relevant social media, the website links, everything like that will be both overlaid on the video that goes out and in the description below. And please do try and take home, perhaps more so than usual with these interviews. These aren't just pieces of advice. These aren't just feel-good take-home messages. These are legally important rules which will affect all of us for as long as we continue to work as doctors, I suppose, and potentially even after that, should something come to light down the line. So please do, make some notes, take it on board. When you're thinking about going to your medical school interviews, which many of you are doing, showing some awareness of good medico-legal practice may go down well, because it's one less thing that they have to worry about, when you're their medical student. So thank you very much, Rebecca. Take care and all the very best.
Thanks ever so much for having me, Ollie. It's been great speaking to you.
No problem. Take care. Bye-bye.